So I'm Dean Sherzai. You get the lesser half of the team Sherzai. The better half is sitting there beautifully. And but you'll get her later with the cooking sessions and as well, nutrition and everything else. I'll allude to nutrition a bit, but so we met about 18 years ago. We are a very service-oriented family. I've traveled throughout the world, Africa, Asia. We met in Afghanistan, where she had gone back with Doctors Without Borders, and I was with World Bank initially, and then I was asked to actually help recreate the entire healthcare system at the time in 2001, and then 2002, with Tommy Thompson, those of you guys that know him. And we were in an expat party. I was sitting and talking, and all of a sudden this lady showed up and sat next to me and started talking to me. That's my version. And since I go first, I'm going to take that version. And we started talking. Our first conversation was about our grandparents. She had a grandfather and a grandmother that suffered from Alzheimer's, and I had a grandfather and grandmother that suffered from Alzheimer's. In fact, my grandfather was an amazingly powerful human being, brilliant, absolutely one of the most brilliant minds I've ever known in my life. I've been at NIH and all these places with Nobel Prize winners. He was brilliant. And hers was the same, Johns Hopkins and Columbia trained surgeon. And they both suffered from Alzheimer's. The story of my grandfather, we had a farm in Virginia, Frederick, Virginia. We have a family of surgeons. I'm one of the few non-surgeons. And surgeons think they're hunters. So we had a huge farm, about 250 acres for hunting. On the weekends, we would go there, and thank goodness for the animals, surgeons make terrible hunters. And we would never be able to hunt anything, even cheating with the lights and the deer and all of that stuff. And then we would end up going to Giant Eagle, those from East Coast know those places, and and buy some meat and bring it and act like we got some hunt. So, and then everybody would gather around my grandfather, and he would be talking about philosophies, this and that, and then we would be playing chess. And one of the things that stood out and stands out, and I remember it all the time, and we've written in our books, is when he forgot how to move the knight. For those of you who play chess, knight has a little weird move, L-shaped move. He forgot how to move. And that moment, 20 grandchildren who are sitting in awe of this man, everybody froze. Back then, nobody knew about Alzheimer's, and surgeons don't know about Alzheimer's anyway. I always pick on surgeons. And so that moment actually codified my journey. It started the journey. It was the beginning point. And from then on, whether it was Georgetown or NIH or UCSD, which were the top places in the world at the time, my thing was, how do we do something about this disease? And when we met, of all the places, in the middle of an expat party in Afghanistan, both of us had this mission. So a year later, after dating in Afghanistan, imagine that, we got married, and we came back to UCSD to restart this journey. And what we found was, by the way, we're not against medicine. So for those of you, we're not the kind that throws the baby out with the bathwater. Medicine has done amazing things. We lived that long. But the problem with the medical system is, if there is a problem, is that it's focusing 100% on treatment and not enough on prevention. And there should be just a shift. Keep the medicine that's doing amazing things. Absolutely. I've been involved in clinical trials and medicines that have saved us, and now we are living into our 80s and 90s. But prevention is being avoided. There's no prevention, absolutely none, in the healthcare system that we have. And prevention works. From a scientific point of view, I tell you that when we were at UCSD doing this amazing work with fMRIs, which look at the brain while you're working, they're remarkable, but there was absolutely nothing about prevention. So a person would come to you with fulminant Alzheimer's, and at that point they say, okay, here's the diagnosis, here's some Aricept or this or that, and that's it. Okay, that's not enough. We need to do something about prevention. Before I go on, I also want to make sure that you guys know that we're very science-based. So there are a lot of physicians out there making claims that they can reverse Alzheimer's. They're charlatans. You can make a lot of money. They had told us that if we just hinted at the fact that we could reverse the disease, we would sell 2 million extra books. We said we can't, and we won't. Prevention is enough. Prevention will do a lot. We're talking about anywhere between 60 to 90% of Alzheimer's can be prevented, not 100%. So I want to make sure that I never want to extrapolate beyond the data, beyond facts. And if we can stop 80% of people, 60% of people from developing dementia, isn't that enough? So I wanted to set the stage with that in mind. And our journey for the last 18 years has been that, to make sure that we promulgate and spread the message as far as prevention is concerned, but in a scientific way, not exaggerated way. So that's the way we want to do it. Start with the brain. I usually have a model brain in my hand, but it's literally, if you take two fists, it's 3 pounds, 2% of your body's weight, but consumes 25% of your body's energy. That's remarkable. Why? Why would there be so much investment in this thing? Because the brain is there to surveil its environment, to learn about its environment, to experience its environment, to experience the beauty of the world around it. This brain wants to be challenged, and we'll start with that hint. The brain wants to be challenged, and we'll get to that. So we have a group that already is here with that in mind, so there's a self-selection there. And we have 87 billion neurons, and we can make as many as 1 quadrillion connections. That's more powerful than any supercomputer right now. Right now. I'm also aware of the fact that in the future there will be supercomputers more powerful. But right now, and when they say that we only use 10% of our brain capacity, that's false. We use 100% of the brain, but probably at 1% efficiency. And that's where the potential lies. That's where the possibilities lie. And we have examples of people that have lived long, healthy, brilliant, and growing minds. I'm going to give a couple of the ones that you might be aware of. How many here are aware of Dr. Wareham? Okay. Dr. Wareham was a surgeon at Loma Linda University who did open to closed surgeries up to age 95. That's remarkable, because usually surgeons after the age of 65, they stand there, arms crossed, with a frown in their face and telling the nurse practitioners or the PAs to do this, that, and the other. But this man did amazing work up to age 95. And at 95, he retired because he said he wanted to travel. And he did. He traveled, he gave talks, he stood for lifestyle, and an amazing, amazing human being, fully mentally active till the very end. And at the end, in the last month, he passed away. And that's what we want to do as a human beings. It's called squaring the curve. As it is the way it is today in the United States and most of the world, there's a curve. Starting in your 40s, the blood pressure thing, and then the cholesterol thing, then the insulin-resistant thing, then the chronic diseases, heart, kidney, this, that. So it's a curve of decline, and then the joints, and then the arthritis, and then the gait problem, and so that curve. And the hope is that we can square the curve. You're fine, and the last 2 days, 3 days, month, yeah, that's the idea. And especially as it pertains to the brain. I'm not even worried so much about physical, but the brain. Jane Goodall is another person who's as active now. Linus Pauling did some of his amazing research well into his 80s and 90s. Picasso did some of his amazing paintings in his 90s, but I guess nobody would know. I'm joking. I'm aware of modern art, so I'm not that unsophisticated. But so the idea is to see if we can change much of the population towards the green curve. As it is, our cognitive decline starts very early. Somebody here came and said, why don't you give this talk to people younger? Because we have teenagers. They think they're immortal. Even 20-year-olds, they think they're immortal. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I used to eat meat 7 times a day with beef jerky in the middle, and then sweets and sugar and Kit Kats and you name it, whatever it was. And I played soccer, tennis, football. And I got back surgeries. You think you're immortal. It's difficult to get the message to younger people saying that the decline starts in your 20s, actually earlier, and I'll talk about that. If we don't do the right things for our kids as far as food is concerned, the problem is much worse than ADHD, I can tell you that. We're talking about vascular disease in 12-year-olds, and I'll speak to that in a bit. But the decline, the shrinkage of the brain starts in your 20s, and you don't see it. Why? Because you have enough reserve to withstand the changes. So you don't see it, you don't see it, you don't see it until the last straw. That forgetfulness that's beyond the normal. Yeah, I forget the key here and there, but if you forget the key, the car, and the person in it, that's pretty bad. Yeah, and so by definition, dementia, which I'll come to, is that when you multiple domains. But that didn't happen that moment. That happened 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier. Now it doesn't. Now I want to make sure that you don't take this as hopeless. The same way that a disease starts much later, the rebuilding can start at any age because of those 1 quadrillion connections I was talking about. That's profoundly powerful. And that's the key here. So we are trying to change the red curve. By the way, MCI stands for mild cognitive impairment, which is a pre-dementia stage. People who have MCI have a much higher proclivity or tendency for Alzheimer's. So it starts in your 60s and we can change it to the green line. But before we go on to the positive and the prevention, let's talk about what we have facing us right now. Every 64 seconds, there's somebody diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And actually, that's an understatement. In certain communities, that diagnosis is much lower. The African-American communities, Hispanic communities, and it's not even racial. In West Virginia, if you go to, the places where information is not spreading, the diagnosis is much lower. And the risk is much higher, twice as much, 3 times as much. And it's not genetics, it's environment and lifestyle. 6.2 million people in the United States right now suffer from it. It's the 5th leading cause of mortality and morbidity in US. It's #1 in UK, it's #1 in Japan, and it will be #1 here. Worldwide numbers, this is the number we're talking about. By the way, my intention is never to exaggerate the data. I try to be, and this is not to scare you, because the truth is actually pretty positive what we can do. That's why we go from community to community, from talk to talk. Right now, we have an online community for a week, my wife and I, and 6,500 people are there. We're just giving them information. And so that number can be changed worldwide. After the age of 65, 1 in 10 individuals suffer from Alzheimer's. And that number doubles every 10 years until at age 85, nearly 50% suffer from Alzheimer's. As I said, this number is going to grow rapidly. Part of it is because we're aging as a society, and that's a good thing. We're surviving the heart attacks, a little bit of stent. We're surviving, the kidney problems. We have dialysis and other things. But what we're left with is a lot of damage to the brain, and the numbers are going to grow. That cost number is actually an underestimate. That's the direct cost. The second costliest disease in America today is heart disease. 120 billion. You know what the cost of Alzheimer's is? Direct cost, 320 billion. Indirect cost, another 240 billion. That's now. That's 5 times bigger than heart disease, the #1 killer, but the second costliest. The 1.1 trillion by 2040, 2050 is the direct cost. The total cost will be nearly $3 trillion, which will by itself collapse our healthcare system and our system in general. If we don't start focusing on prevention, that's the key. And that's just a financial cost. The human cost is what we see in our clinics. Currently, we do 2 days of clinic in Loma Linda, and it's just because of our own psychology. We love that patient interaction. And we drive from Redondo to Loma Linda. For those of you who are familiar with Southern California, that's 88 miles, 2 days a week. The two of us in the car, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But it's husband and wife, 18 years. But it's often about plans to create a new way to do something better, right? So first, dementia. Dementia is the umbrella category. By definition, dementia is when a person is having cognitive problems, be it memory, focus, attention, executive function, to the extent where it's affecting one of their daily activities, such as driving, finances, answering phone calls, basic activities. Then it's dementia. But there are many types of dementia. The biggest one, the largest one, which is 60 to 80%, is Alzheimer's. But there are many other types. So you have Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal lobe dementia, and on and on. And Huntington's dementia, which is terrible, and that's a genetic one. But Alzheimer's is the dominant one. As I said, the cost is growing rapidly. And there are other disparities. I talked about the racial disparities. African Americans suffer 2 to 3 times more. Hispanics 2 times more. Low socioeconomic, the same thing, 2 times. Women have twice the risk. 1 in 6 women will experience Alzheimer's in their lifetime, and 1 in 11 men. And most of that is not because women live longer. It's more than that. We just had on our podcast a brilliant OBGYN that talks about this, the hormonal effects, the pregnancy-related issues, the vascular issues, and the stressors later in life, especially as the men pass away earlier. So all of those contribute to cognitive decline and dementia. Before we talk about what we can do about it, I always have to dispel some myths. One of the biggest myths is that it cannot be prevented. And when we first started talking about this, and we don't extrapolate, we don't make up things. We don't take a little data and blow it out of proportion. We try to stay to the true weight of the data, right? And the data was there. When we were at UCSD, which was the #1 neuroscience program in the country at the time, we're looking at the data, and the data shows that there is prevention, there is treatment, there are lifestyle, but nobody's talking about it because the platform was dominated with treatment, amyloid treatment, and tau treatment, and this kind of stuff. And we were wondering, why is there nobody talking about it? So coming out of UCSD, where we had a chance to go to any university we wanted to, as usual, we're risk takers. We said, we're going to go to a place where they've done lifestyle research. And when we said this to our mentors, Dr. Leon Thal, which was one of the biggest names in neuroscience, he said, that's career suicide. We said, okay, that's a good way to die. So we went to Loma Linda. Loma Linda is one of the blue zones. How many people here are aware of blue zones? Okay, everybody. Dan is a good friend of ours, so he's done his job well in spreading the message. And the blue zones are the places where people live longer and healthier than everywhere else. Actually, the statement should be reversed. The blue zones used to be places where people lived longer and healthier than everywhere else, except for Loma Linda, which is not a place, actually. It's the Seventh-day Adventist. But the other ones in Italy and Greece and Nicaragua, and all of the other ones have changed. The westernization has completely changed. And whether you go to Nicosia or any of the other ones, now you see more McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken than you do fresh fruits and olive oil. So that's a sad thing. So the numbers are changing. But originally, they lived much longer and healthier than everyone else. And we came to Loma Linda and looked at the Adventist Health Study, which is the largest study, 100,000 people, 96,000 to be exact, over 50 years. The data shows that people who live a particular type of life, I'm not going to give that up right now, we'll do it in a second, they live 12 years longer and healthier than everyone else. Not 12 days. People pay lots of late night people money for pills that's supposed to extend their life and brain and memory. None of those work, by the way. But extends their life by 12 years. I mean, women, men differently, and there's some other stratifications, but in general, 12 years. Why is there nobody talking about it? 12 years. One hint, adding 2, you want to leave right now if I'm getting on your nerve already? Here, I'll give you a hint. Add 2 servings of greens to your diet, and your life is extended and made better by 11 years. That's not extrapolation. That's not an exaggeration. You're done. I've done my job right there. That's an incredible piece of data. No matter what you do, hopefully you'll reduce the negative things as well. But the positive, like just greens, adding 2 servings is going to extend your life that much. So the data was there. The data is there in Loma Linda and the Seventh-day Adventist. The data is there from Framingham study, Harvard. The data is there from California teacher study, 133,000 people over 20 years. My wife was one of the researchers that won the National Academy Award for it, for her research there. Mediterranean diet, guess what a Mediterranean diet really is? We'll get to that. Well, I'm not going to steal her thunder, so we'll leave it there. So prevention is possible. And one of the reasons that prevention was not highlighted is because sometimes the shiny object takes the attention. The amyloid and the tau. Yes, amyloid is a protein that accumulates with aging. By the way, it's not just Alzheimer's, with aging, and especially in Alzheimer's. So, and tau was the one that was more strongly correlated. So that took attention. And for 20, 30 years, especially from UCSD where we were, research after research, clinical trial after clinical trial, enzymes against amyloid, antibodies against amyloid, you name it, vitamins, concoctions against amyloid, nothing would work, zero effect. And even the latest drug, that you've heard about, I can't name it, but the Biogen drug, it didn't show much. It showed a little signal, but it was exaggerated, and then FDA had to pull back. So nothing yet. Yet we have real evidence that shows that prevention is possible. So amyloid and tau has taken us in a wrong direction for 20, 30 years. Not that this research shouldn't be done. It should be done. There's a clue there, but it shouldn't be the totality of research. The second myth is that it's a genetic disease. We are all genetic beings. We heard it talk before. Every cell in your body have genes, except red blood cells after they come out. They get rid of their DNA, and it's just a hemoglobin-carrying vesicle. But in general, we're all genetic beings. But genetic penetrance, meaning that what percentage of the outcome is determined by the given gene, varies. There are diseases that are driven by 100% penetrant genes, meaning that if you have the gene, you're going to get the disease. An example of that is Huntington's disease. It's a terrible disease. We know that there's a lesion in chromosome 4. We can actually detect it early, and we do, because if a father has it, then we check, and we know when it's going to happen. We know the beginnings of it, and it's a horrible disease to watch. The psychological, the physical, the movement disorders, and then the brain shrinking rapidly at age 30 to 40. And it's genetic. We're hoping genetic engineering like CRISPR and others will have some effect, but we're not there yet. It's, again, exaggerated at this point, but we're hoping. But for Alzheimer's, the genetic penetrance is not 100%. Only 3% of all Alzheimer's is driven by kind of genes that are 100% penetrant. That left upper corner, do you see that? Presenilin-1, PSEN1, and PSEN2, presenilin-2, and APP. Down syndrome individuals have 3 chromosome 21s. They have an APPs on that chromosome. So if they live to 40 to 50, they usually get Alzheimer's. So yes, but 3% of the Alzheimer's cases are driven by those genes, 100% penetrance. There are many other genes, now nearly 50 genes. The second highest penetrant genes is ApoE4. How many people have heard of ApoE4? The ApoE4 is a gene that if you have one gene from one parent, your risk goes up 4 times. If you have 2 genes, one from each parent, your risk goes up 12 times. So does that mean that if you have 2 genes, you're going to get the disease? Well, 2% of the population have 2 genes. They don't. 50% never does get the disease. Why? Here's a clue: lifestyle. There's another study, the Nigerian study. In Nigeria, a greater proportion of population have ApoE4, but while in Nigeria, in the past, again, even Nigeria has changed now, was not, their risk of Alzheimer's was actually lower than US. But the same population, when they came to the United States, guess what happened? Way higher. Why? Genes do not outcome make. It's environment on top of genes that have importance. What about this other cluster? Let me tell you what those genes are. Those are your genes, your response to inflammation. We always have inflammation in our body, right? And how your body responds to it, if it's good, if your genes are good about, then you're going to do well. But if they're bad, guess what? Even a little bit of inflammation is going to affect you over time. There are genes for getting rid of garbage disposal. It's called endocytosis and exocytosis, getting rid of garbage from your body. If your genes are good for that, you can get rid of garbage well. But if you're not, guess what? So what kind of garbage are we talking about? Environmental factors, right? You know, there's, I'm going to age myself here. Henny Youngman, anybody knows the comedian? Yes. Doctor, it hurts when I do this. Don't do that, yeah. Doctor, I have ApoE4, that's a cholesterol transporting gene, protein, and cholesterol is affected. So if I have a bad gene for cholesterol and lipids and fats, what do? Don't eat fats. Don't eat saturated fat. So there's a lot of clues in the genetics. The third myth is that there will be one medication that will solve this problem. Alzheimer's is not a one disease. It's a conglomeration of diseases. Yeah, Huntington is one disease. This, in fact, we know but Alzheimer's and dementia definitely, but even Alzheimer's is a conglomeration. It's not going to be one drug. If there is going to be a drug, it's going to affect it, but it's not going to cure it. It's going to be a multitude of behaviors that are instituted in life. And then we've done hundreds and literally 500 drug trials. The cost is immense because there's a phase 1 in a drug trial, phase 2, then phase 3. By the time it gets to phase 3, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars altogether, all these studies, and zero effect. The drugs that we have for Alzheimer's, they're not disease modifying, they're just symptom drugs, meaning that the disease continues. All you're doing helping memory for a little bit, but then after 4 years, they fall where they would have otherwise, same place. So it's not affecting the course of the disease, just symptoms. And the last myth is that it starts with forgetfulness. It doesn't. It has started earlier. And we can do something about it earlier, before it started. So the flaws in our methodology right now, it's too molecular. Molecular research is needed, absolutely. But if it's all molecular research, you're not actually talking about the human side of things. The short-term clinical trials, I'm going to kind of show our cards. The diet du jour. What's the diet du jour right now? What is the diet everybody's talking about? Yesterday, with our population, about 60,000 people, we talked about the different diets. There are like a 30 keto. People think that, oh, this is the only diet that people have been talking about. There are 60 diets that we've gone over in the last 40 years, from paleo, keto, Mediterranean, Medfast. Keto is just the latest one that's popular, shiny. It's popular because we love hearing good news about our bad habits. I love that statement. We search for good news about our bad habits. Growing up in Pittsburgh, bacon, egg, and cheese. That was my go-to, especially after exercise. But if somebody would have shown me even a bad paper research that showed that worked, that would have been my medicine. So that's the driver, the easy thing, or keeping us at what we're doing that's easy, or to take away one thing or put in one thing. Blueberries are amazing. But you think you're going to save yourself with just blueberries? No. So I want to make sure that we approach this in a complex way. But complexity doesn't mean difficult. I'll get to, I'm a behavioral neurologist, and I love that part, which we can empower people. The third problem is lack of translation. Just because something works in a mouse, every newspaper you're hearing about the breakthrough research is a mouse model. How many of those do you think has translated to humans? None. I don't want the author or the poet said, mice do not men make, Mice are not men. Their life cycle is 2 years. How do you translate a 2-year life cycle to a human? That's why they've failed every single time. By the way, everything that you've heard about, from blueberries to aluminum to all those studies on mice, they worked. But on humans, they don't work. So that's the problem, translation. That's why most of our work, just the two of us, and we've raised all the money towards these activities, is in the communities. Because if you don't translate it in communities and you don't measure it, just because I say, there are a lot of internet doctors say, oh, my experience. You saw all those degrees at the beginning? The MD PhD? Throw them out. You should value me with the data that I give you right now and how accurate that data is and how repeatable that data is and how there's consensus around that data. Anything else is opinions. So it's critical that we do science well. And that's why the community side of things, we have to do it at the community where it's translation, and we have to be able to measure the change, and we can show. So we've been working we won the National Academy of Medicine Award for our work in the African-American communities. We've done work in Redondo Beach, which is very different. It's very affluent, but they're still involved there. We did it in Loma Linda and San Bernardino. So the hope is this, that we can change this curve, because the process, the preclinical, starts 20 to 30 years earlier. There are many studies that have now shown, initially this was controversial, but now even in Alzheimer's conference, one of the plenary talks was this, that in a study, and several big studies, but especially this one, showed that people who had genetic risk for Alzheimer's, their risk went up 60%. But if this same group type with the same genetic risk, if they had poor lifestyle as defined by X, Y, and Z, their risk had gone up 360%. And if the same group had good lifestyle, the risk was less than 30%. And that was the plenary talk in front of 10,000 people. When we were, I think, the only husband and wife that were giving high fives, saying that, okay, they've now come to this realization. And then a healthy lifestyle study that showed that when they looked at, this is the one study in Rush University, when they looked at these lifestyle factors such as mind diet, and Aisha will expand on mind diet a little more, smoking cessation, exercise, more than 150 minutes a week, and cognitive engagement. And if people had 0 to 1 of those in their life, the risk was 100% with the genetics. If they did 2 to 3 of those, their risk was lowered by 37%. And if they did 4 to 5, their risk was lowered by 60%. Look at this. This is not some pill. This is not some late night vitamin or something that ends with a gen. We'll just leave it at that. It's real life things. And it's incredibly powerful. And the finger study, the Finnish geriatric study, they're not very creative with their names, but this actually showed that a multi-domain approach to brain actually can reduce risk significantly. We were privileged by American College of Lifestyle Medicine to lead all of this, and this is our review paper with them that was published, and you can find it on our websites. And this is the review paper that actually the Family Medicine, Journal of Family Medicine, the biggest journal, asked us to write a review on Alzheimer's prevention. So I guess everybody's coming around to prevention. This is a paper we did on NHANES, which is a nationwide database looking at insulin resistance, not diabetes, pre-diabetes, which is not treated usually, and looked at cognition and pre-diabetes. And guess what? They had lower cognitive state. This is not to scare people. We look at this as empowerment because those are things we can affect, we can influence, right? And this is the meta-analysis. That's the NHANES one. So after looking at all the data, we realized there are 5 factors that are, so 4 mechanisms basically that are the drivers of disease. Inflammation, oxidation, glucose dysregulation, and lipid or fat dysregulation. So glucose dysregulation is insulin resistance, diabetes, pre-diabetes, and all that spectrum, type 1, type 2, and all that, but untreated. Lipid dysregulation is high cholesterol, high lipids, those kind of things. Inflammation, self-evident, inflammation either systemically or at a point, even things like gingival disease, chronic gingival disease have been associated with things. So, and oxidation also comes from metabolic abnormalities where these free radicals start damaging other tissues. So how do you affect these things? These sound so complicated. Oxidation, inflammation. Well, there are 5 pathways. Nutrition. Today, I won't go too much into nutrition. I'll leave that for Aisha, who's her master's, she's a culinary artist and a vascular neurologist, so she'll do a better job. Exercise, and I'll tell you what type and how much. Unwind, which is stress management. By the way, stress has 2 arms. Ironically, the good stress is even more important than the bad stress. Yes, there is such thing as good stress. That's why you have that brain. Restorative sleep and optimizing mental and social activities. So with that, we've come up with this kind of self-serving acronym. We're neurologists, both of us, so neuro, N for nutrition, E for exercise, U for unwind, stress management, R is for restorative sleep, not just sleep, but restorative sleep. You can be knocked out, but if you're not getting those deep sleep cycles, it's not going to be efficient. And O is optimizing mental and social activity. Optimizing social and mental activity is critically important. Now I'll talk about that. By the way, within N is smoking and alcohol as well. I know that I'm kind of in a wine country, so I might be kicked out of here pretty soon. So yeah. We did a video on alcohol and its benefit for the brain, and it got 150,000 views and many unkind comments, but nonetheless, here it is. So nutrition, I think you're going to get a clue from this picture in the back, but and I'll go. And nutrition is incredibly important because 3 to 5 times a day, everything that you eat makes or breaks your body. It's the foundation of your structure. It's critical what we eat. So, and then the oxidative, inflammatory, glucose, and lipid pathway, all 4 of those are driven by nutrition on a meal-to-meal basis. It's incredibly powerful. So, oh, and by the way, we don't focus on foods, although in our book we talk about the Neuro 9 and the Thoughtful 20. Those are just there to kind of help. But the reality is we believe in food patterns as opposed to one food. Yeah, it really doesn't mean anything if you're eating a ton of blueberries, but on the side you're eating a bucket of French fried chicken. You know, so it's food patterns that are critically important. I'll get to exercise. So exercise is more important for the brain than you think. It's probably more important for the brain than any other organ. It has direct effects on neuroplasticity, and I'll explain that, on BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, an amazing hormone, increases blood supply. By the way, the most vascular organ in your body is your brain. If you take a picture of the brain, and you can look in the internet, where they've denuded all the other substrates of the brain, and all they've left is vasculature, and look at that and say, how could there be room for anything else? It's the most vascular organ, and that's going to be affected by the food and everything else, and especially with exercise, which gives it proper amount of blood supply. And reduces insulin resistance, reduces depression, anxiety, and attention deficit. Multiple studies have shown that the most effective antidepressant and anti-anxiety drug is exercise. Now, I want to make sure that people don't get me wrong, that I'm not against antidepressants. I'm not. If people are here, I'm not. There are times where that's needed. There is time that anti-anxiety medicine is needed. But we should definitely start an exercise regimen so that slowly it can replace it if it can. And exercise is incredibly effective. Multiple studies have shown that it reduces the prevalence of vascular diseases and neurodegenerative. Aisha was, like I said, won the American Medical Heart Association's highest award for her work in California teacher study looking at strokes and diet. And I did work on dementia and diet. Neuroplasticity talks about connectivity. Each neuron of the 87 billion neurons, let me step back. People compare the brain to muscles, right? What's the biggest human being you know, most muscular? I don't know many muscular people, but let's take Schwarzenegger at his peak. At biggest, he was 3 times bigger than he could have been otherwise, right, without muscle. So I think it's very unfair to compare the brain to muscles. Each neuron can make a couple of connections or as many as 30,000 connections. That's not 3 times. That's 15,000 times. That's the power of the brain and its connectivity. By the way, here's the hope. Here's the ultimate hope. That connectivity is available to us at any age. At any age. Now, cell reproduction is not. So some people make the claim that we make new cells. But we don't have to. 87 billion neurons is way more than we need. I have multiple studies and multiple patients where their brain has shrunk because of hydrocephalus. So they have 1/3 of the normal volume, but they were cognitively active. And one of them actually, I can't name names or give any circumstance, was a summa cum laude professor of psychology with 1/3 the brain. So the number of neurons is not as important as the connectivity, the number of connections. And those number of connections are under our control at any age. At any age. They've seen actually with studies that even 90-year-olds and 100-year-olds that can still make sprouting, neuronal sprouting. So that's the beauty of that. When you exercise, your inflammatory markers go down, your growth factors go up, your insulin resistance is controlled at the neuronal level, which is very hard. It's just remarkable the things that exercise can do. So I'm going to just quote a couple of the studies. A 2010 meta-analysis of 15 studies, nearly 34,000 people found that a high level of physical activity could lower risk of cognitive decline by 38% in this particular population, and even moderate by as much as 35%. We're talking about a disease that right now has no pill that does 1%, no vitamin that does 1%, yet exercise that does this. Strength training is important. So as much as we think that aerobic is important, where you get tired and short of breath, And that is important. Let me take a side step on that. When patients come to me, they say, Dr. Sherzai, don't worry about exercise. I'm fine. Why? I walk the neighborhood. I garden. I walk the dog. I said, all those are great, but those are meditation. For exercise, aerobic, you got to get tired. You got to get short of breath. You got to sweat a bit. And that line changes. And that doesn't mean you have to run or do a ultra running or anything like that. But for you, whatever that means, it could be, and many of my patients, one of the things I do is get them in front of their TV. If they're sitting watching TV, they have to move that foot pedal exerciser. And every few commercials, rev it up. And that's good because most people have balance issues or some knee issues or hip issues. So you eliminate the impediments to bring about the behavior. And that's great. So aerobic is important. You got to get tired. Or if they have lower extremity problems, that foot pedal exerciser? Put it on the table sideways and move it with the upper extremity because this is a closed system. Whatever you work in the upper extremity also works at the lower extremity and the whole body. So find a way to exercise. But strength training is very important. People who did strength training, especially legs, actually had bigger brains. And this was remarkable. They did this in twin studies. They did this in prospective studies. They've done this in multiple studies. And right now, actually, Aisha and I are in charge of 5 review papers that our medical students in different parts of the country are running. And one of them is doing this again, looking at strength training and brain health. And in one study, looking at MCIs. These are pre-dementia patients. They can still drive and do finance, but the memory problems are bad enough that it's not normal memory loss anymore. It's MCI. And they got 2 groups. One did stretching, the other one did strength training. And guess what they found? Compared to stretching, the strength training group, especially leg strength, they actually lowered their risk of Alzheimer's by 47%. 47. So why are legs so important? Because the biggest pump in your body that pumps blood to your brain is not your heart. It's the legs. The biggest source of BDNF, not here, but the fact that you work out the legs, BDNF is produced in the brain, this growth factor, which makes the connection, is leg strength. But even aside from that, blood supply, vascular, BDNF and everything else, the number one reason people end up in the emergency room when they're older is what? Falls. Guess what significantly reduces that? Leg strength. So if you're going to do anything under supervision of a physician, that's a tough little, and having safety in mind. We always talk about that, not just because I don't want to get sued, but just it's a wise thing to do. Do leg strength exercises. And no chairs here. One of my favorite is you're sitting on a couch, put a little chair in front of you, and if you have no knee problems or, while you're watching, get up and do mini squats. Mini squats. Not even the big lunges or anything like that, just mini squats. And if you fall, guess where you're going to fall? Back on the couch. And in front of you is the chin. So it seems like silly little thing. It's not. It's the small, meaningful, measurable, achievable acts. The SMART goals that change lives. Not the bombastic or the unusual names that we throw, keto and this and that, So it's the small behaviors that change. If you want to exercise aerobically, get one of those foot pedal exercises, not the flimsy one, little that's sturdy on the ground, and give yourself the rule that if I'm going to watch TV, I'm going to keep that moving. And every few commercials, I rev it up and measure it. Our dopamine reward system is our behavior change system. If you have a list next to you, exercise, do the neuro every day, little box. You did the exercise for a day, check it off. That checking off is literally more powerful than any drug in getting behavior change. So if you ate well that day, check it off. If you did stress management, as I'm going to talk, check it off. And that creates patterns of behavior change. So, and then the Framingham study that people who did a brisk is the operative term, walk every day continuously, guess how much they reduced their chance? Why am I saying yes? They've already put it up. 40% reduction in Alzheimer's risk. Brisk walk. These are powerful numbers. And Aisha will tell you about nutrition and the numbers there. I mean, right there, we're going better than anything else. And these are real, meaningful, reproducible studies not just some flimsy little study that somebody did in their clinic and then they published this as science, which you will see a lot of people doing. So the 40% grows the brain, it increases blood supply to the brain, increases the connectivity of the brain. It's a powerful drug, the best anxiety drug, the best depression drug, the best attention drug, exercise. And this is coming from a person that's not against medicine, saying it right now. It's great, they're doing good jobs. Well, the business side of it is a little, but we'll talk about the science side. And then one other thing, sedentary behavior negates, nullifies movement. Even if you worked out half an hour, but then you sit down for 8 hours in a row, you've nullified. So make your life, your environment, a moving environment. We have a house in Redondo. Well, we're renting a house because we're so moving. And the dining room is whiteboard painted so we can write on the walls. We have 2 teenagers, so they're always writing their ideas and everything. We have a ping pong table for a dining table. And it's always, and our dining place where we're sitting, working is around the kitchen where Aisha and I work for making the meal. Well, she's the chef and I'm the sous chef. And then we stand and talk. So movement is everything. The dumbbells are right in front of the couches. We stand up and move around. We talk. And so movement should be part of your natural life. Not this little thing that started for a while that stand-up desks. Okay, everybody got stand-up, but nobody ever used it. They lowered it down and sat down. No, the mindset should change. The mindset should be one of mobility and action. And that works. Sleep. So sleep, nobody sleeps like that. I know I don't. Aisha sleeps like that. I'm jealous of her. I have to be honest. But I don't. One of my downfalls is sleep. But we'll talk about what we can do. So why is sleep important? So what is sleep? It's the most important 7 to 8 hours of your day. There's the clue, 7 to 8 hours. That's the optimal. And why would you, and by the way, during sleep, you're knocked out and you're paralyzed. In fact, when you move, there's something wrong. There's actually a dopamine pathway problem. In fact, they think that that's something that's a clue for other processes. So you're paralyzed. So why would that be useful? Those bears, tigers, coming at you at night where you have no protection. Why? Because that's how important sleep is for your brain. When we say that sleep is the most important time of your day, we mean it. Because this brain is overwhelmed. It was not expecting to live past 30 to 40. But it's living past 60, 70, 80, 90, and I want to live well into my 90s and beyond. And it's overwhelmed. It's constantly working, and it's also encased in this hermetically sealed environment called cerebrospinal barrier, basically, blood-brain barrier, where nothing can get through. And waste accumulates. Now, sleep does 2 things. One, during those 8 hours, it cleanses the brain. And second, it consolidates memory. Your memory actually is consolidated during sleep, organized during sleep. The sleep architecture looks like this. You go through several phases. This has changed. There used to be 4, N4, but now it's consolidated to 3, N3. So you have N1, which is first phase, N2, N3, which is the deepest delta sleep, and then REM, repetitive eye movement, and then back. You're supposed to go through those cycles 4 to 5 times a night. The most important part of it is the deepest cavern, N3, where you're in delta sleep, you've gone through the different phases, and that's where the cleansing takes place. Incredible changes in brain that take place during this time. The glymphatic system is turned on. The glymphatic system is composed of 2 types of processes. One is this fluid that actually washes through the brain, and the second is the glial cells, microglia, that actually go in and clean up the brain. They actually eat up bad connections. They eat away the amyloid and tau proteins that accumulate. So they do incredible work. And that's what happens during deep restorative sleep. This is the lymphatic system. By the way, your brain actually consolidates and shrinks during sleep so that there's more room for this fluid to move and clean. It's just remarkable. And this was just recently found in the last 15 years. initially University of Rochester and UVA. And if it's not doing the job, the waste products accumulate, and they start clogging up the connections between the brain cells. Okay, so before we go on as far as what can we do for sleep, a couple of processes that we have to talk about. Sleep apnea. It's one of the more underdiagnosed processes. And I always say we're so penny-wise, dollar-foolish a lot of times, most of us. We worry about little vitamin here, which we do need, those vitamins, but sleep apnea, nobody gets diagnosed. And if somebody snores loudly, get it checked. Because sleep apnea means there are periods of time during the night where you're actually holding your breath. Be it obstructive or central, most commonly obstructive, people are holding their breath. And that means oxygen saturation drops. The very substance, the most important substance that your brain needs, which is oxygen, is getting lower level. And the beauty of it is that it's reversible, it's treatable. I know the treatment, how many people have used CPAP or know about people who use, yeah, it's not the easiest device, I know that. But everybody gets used to it, and the alternative is terrible. But when you do use the CPAP machine, you lower the risk completely. That's the important part of this. So if you have sleep apnea, other sleep disorders like restless leg syndrome is important to diagnose. A lot of times it's just iron deficiency or folate deficiency or metabolic abnormalities. Other times there are neuropathies that are affecting you, and they're easy to figure out what the neuropathy is and treat it. So it's important to know what's affecting your sleep and do something about it. The other thing about this I want to say is invest in your sleep hygiene, invest in your sleep environment. We get invited to a lot of resorts, and we're not very much resort-oriented speakers, although they pay well, but we don't care about the money part. But we go there with the idea of changing minds and all these gimmicks, lots of gimmicks, and then we tell them that instead of spending money, that's why we don't get invited again, and spending money on resorts or gimmicks, if you invested in your bedroom, literally the best investment. Best investment. So how do you invest? I can't go too much into the sleep. We have a whole week of this that we talk about, but sleep hygiene and cognitive behavioral therapy. Sleep hygiene, very quickly, 3 elements: environment, behavior, and food. Environment, light. Right before sleep, lower the lights. Make sure you're not on phones, or at least reduce it initially. We're not about all or none. We're about systematic change. So systematically reduce by hour, by half an hour. And blue lights, TV. If you can not have TV in your bedroom, don't have TV in your bedroom, or at least don't watch the kind of shows that are stimulating and aggressive and scary movies and all of that stuff. So don't do any of that. I don't know if anybody in this population does that anyway, but I hate all of those. So, light should be lowered right before sleep. Your bedroom should be dark, very dark. And then when you wake up, have another light next to your bed that turns on, that's not bright light. It's actually red light or dimmer light, so that it doesn't wake you up. Your circadian clock, which is the supranuclear chiasm right behind the optic nerve, is where the melatonin and the cortisol system is actually controlled. So when you get up in the middle of the night and turn on the light, guess what happened? You reset the whole system. So have something that's lighter. Second is sound. Your brain is a machine that detects threat. Anything that's abnormal from normal. So if you can make your room silent, invest in that. You know, the curtains that block sound, putting something that blocks sound would be great. Or white noise. Now, white noise is not music. I want to make sure that you guys understand that. Because any kind of music that's complex, the brain constantly perceives it as a threat, and even though you might be asleep, but it's not going to deep sleep. Sound of rain, sound of wind, fan, my favorite, the fan. You know, those kind of things are white noise, so do that. Third is temperature. It appears that lower temperature is preferred during sleep. Now, that lower temperature varies for different people. For those husbands and wives, you know that your body temperatures are different, right? So you have to kind of figure out where that lower temperature is, and you can adjust. So that's another one. And then behavior. Very important that you create a pattern of sleep. I really, anytime before 12 o'clock is great. I don't care there's no optimal 10 o'clock or 8 o'clock, but before 12 o'clock. But make sure you go to bed same time and wake up 8 hours later the same time. That pattern resets your brain. Your brain is a pattern recognizing system. When it knows that at 10 o'clock I'm going to bed, guess what? The yawning starts. That was a signal mechanism. But now we go to sleep one time and wake up another time, and so it's all over the place. And we've completely discombobulated the very sleep cycle system. And so patterns matter. And third, food. This is going to surprise you. As much as people keep talking about this food helps with sleep and that food helps with sleep, and what is it? Cashews? No. Pistachios help with sleep. Forget about that. What foods harm sleep are important. Stimulating foods. So we drink coffee, very rarely, but in the mornings. And past 2 o'clock, it's wrong to sleep. I mean, it has a half-life of 8 hours. That means that 8 hours later, you still have half of it in your system. And coffee directly affects the adenosine system that is directly involved in sleep. So don't drink after 2 o'clock, any caffeinated substance. Don't eat foods that stimulate you. What are those? Coffee, caffeine, fatty foods, and sugar. High energy. Even if you're asleep, your body's still working, so it's keeping you from deeper sleep. And a lot of foods that affect GERD, which is this reflux disease, even when you don't have GERD, when you're older, guess what? That reflux system is not as effective. So things like chocolate, things like caffeine, things like fat actually stimulate that, and that's going to agitate and affect your sleep. So that's what not to do. I'm not worried about what you're going to do. That's a separate talk completely. Third, and the next component is running thoughts. We have conditioned ourselves to make the bed into a place where you're supposed to think and worry. And what has happened is as soon as you get into bed now, it stimulates thinking. And often it's exaggerated thinking because there's nothing else. So that person that didn't talk to you at church, you make it into something huge. And then that keeps you awake all night. Well, if you want to dissociate that behavior, get a notepad and a pen with a red light and a chair there. So every time that thought comes, or even if it doesn't, get into bed, get up from bed, sit in the chair, write those thoughts in bullet form, not manifesto. Nothing comes out of that good out of that. And then park it next to you. Now, sleep is more difficult. It's going to take 6 months or more for you to rehabilitate your sleep. But it's that important. Do it. And in the morning, go over that list again. I promise you, it wasn't as important. It wasn't as worrisome. But not just that, the act of dissociating worry from bed, the act of de-escalating the thought is incredibly powerful. It's a cognitive behavioral therapy technique that you can do to help with the sleep. So those are just some of the things that I can kind of give you advice on as far as what you can do to help sleep. As far as medications, yeah, we know melatonin and all these other things. A lot of things can help you go to sleep, but it's not helping you with deeper sleep. Melatonin, we're not so much against, especially under doctor's supervision, but not the way that's being taken now, like candy. It is a neurotransmitter. It's a chemical that affects the brain. So the doses that we're seeing are just amazingly crazy doses. So at lower doses under supervision, we're okay with it. Okay. Optimize. The last and not least. This is mental activity. This is good stress. This is the part that actually makes the connection. We say that nutrition, stress management, and sleep create the environment for the brain to grow. But mental activity and exercise actually grow your brain, completely grow. So here's a really interesting study. It's called the London Taxi Driver Study. How many people have heard of this study? Yeah. So this is a cute study before GPS. Anybody who's been to London, and I love London, so this is not me putting down London. It's the road system is just horrendous. It's all over the place. You know, it's not Chicago, Rush Street, Clark Street, and straight lines. It's all over the place. So taxi drivers were matched against bus drivers. Bus drivers had a simple route that they had to follow. No memorization, they just had to follow. Taxi drivers had to learn. So in order to get that license, they had to learn the entire city. And they did the MRIs of the brain before and after the studying, and they did neuropsychological testing before and after the study. And lo and behold, guess what they found? And these were not young people. These were people older as far as their age is concerned. They found that for this group, the taxi drivers that actually challenged their brain actually grew. Specifically, a part of the brain that's associated with memory, which is the hippocampus, that little red area, the red and blue area, is that part of the brain grew in volume to the extent that you could see it on MRI. MRI, I mean, we know that we think that we've done such amazing jobs with MRI, but it's not a very specific machine. But if you could even see it on MRI, that's remarkable. So that was one study that showed us that even later in life, when you challenge your brain, that part of the brain grows. The nun study was another cute study, beautiful study. Lots of nuns who dedicated their time, their body, their blood, and their diaries. And when they looked at the data, after they died, they all had autopsies, especially of the brain. And they saw that for a group, the brains were inundated with pathology of Alzheimer's, was smaller, but during life, right before death, they were completely normal as far as cognition is concerned. And then another group that had less pathology, but right before death, they had fulminant Alzheimer's. What was the difference? So they looked at the blood markers, they looked at everything else, and then they looked at the diaries. Guess what they found? The ones that were protected in spite of the pathology were more mentally active, more complex vocabulary, much more complex thoughts. What's the term we use? Yes, I'm having memory issues here. No. Trying to highlight my wife too. So idea density. I said I'm a terrible guitar player. If I ever had a band, it would be called Idea Density. But I will never get to that because I'm a terrible guitar player. So idea density is important. How much you challenge your brain is important. In all research, in all neuro research, they always ask one question. Okay? They ask gender, they ask age, and the third is education. But we use education as a blunt marker because it's easy to know 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. That's not it, because otherwise, a lot of people who didn't do college, one person I know that, left high school at age 8, now is a hedge fund billionaire. So it's not education, but we use it because it's easy to measure, right? But it has more to do with mental activity, how a person challenged their brain. They could have started a business at age, 16, and they kept challenging the brain. When you do that, you create cognitive reserve, a brain biobank, a bank account that you can draw from. And if your bank is huge, even a little head trauma does not eliminate it. A little vascular lesion doesn't eliminate it. The nuns that had shrunken brains and had lesions, they still had normal because they had all this connectivity. Their bank account was more than full. So keeping the brain challenged and active is extremely important. To that end, in 2018, we did a study, a meta-analysis, which is the hardest type of research. They have all the other researchers that have done the work in that field have to respect you as the main person. Now I'm showing off here. And then they have to send you their data. And then we collected the data and ran a bigger data set, a study. And out of that, we found out that there are four main things. One is work around your weakness. This is counterintuitive. In leadership world, we talk about working around your strength, right? But when it comes to brain, especially as we get older, find your weakness and work around that. If it's memory, do memory games all the time. A lot of my patients, I say, what do you have passion in? Work around that. Well, I don't, because I did. So what do you do? I watch TV. Okay, great. And guess what show comes up all the time? Blue Bloods. Okay, I don't know why it's Tom Selleck or what it is, but so I say, so watch it with intention. No judgment, nobody asking each other questions, husband and wife or whatever, partners. You watch it, and afterwards, in a notepad, recall details. Not that this was Tom Selleck. No, who was the other character? Where did they go? What street? So make real life into activities, not contrived. If you were into learning a musical instrument, learn that. If you were into learning a new language, learn that. Okay, so I got this. I think he means that for me to turn around. No, okay, good. So my face must have been. So in any case, the second thing came out is purpose, complexity, challenge. Purpose is a scientific word. Purpose means the thing, the activity, behavior, thoughts, emotion that you wanted to be involved in, or you think you might like to be involved in. Push yourself in that direction. More complex, better than simple. Sudoku is great, but I know that I hate Sudoku, that I'm picking on Sudoku, but learning a musical instrument is better. I'm going to be honest. Running a group is better. A book club, a Bible group, you name it. Complexity, conversations with friends, running a business, running a volunteer group. All of that is better because it involves multiple domains. So you're learning a guitar, you're reading the notes. That's your left parietal lobe for most people. Wernicke's Broca's. You're visually processing it. It's your occipital lobe. You're creatively processing it. It's a parietal lobe. You're thinking about it. It's your frontal lobe. You're dexterous. It's your it's your motor cortex. And then you're emotionally involved. That's your limbic system. That's the entire brain being challenged. It's no Sudoku. That's your brain in fire. That's real activity. You don't have to pay anybody anything. There are no groups, nothing. You just need to do that in your own home. The food you can do at home by yourself. Our passion is that, to kind of empower people saying, no, it's in your home. So challenge means push it to the next level. If you learn a song that has 3 chords, which I'm stuck at 3 chords, 20 years, go to 4 chords, even if it hurts you. If you know French 20 words, which helped us, in the coffee shops a little bit, go to 30 words, go to 4. So keep pushing yourself. And if you listen to some of the talks of our patients, and one of them, 2 of them, husband and wife, 83-year-old, spoke in My American Life, which is the most popular, and they talked about how we instituted this in their life, and they could only do 3 recall. Now they can do 27-word recall in 2 minutes. And again, I want to be careful. We're not about exaggeration. That's not always the case. But the path is real. And it's real life activities without you having to pay anybody. Our work, we're wrapping up here. Our work is in the communities and science-based. We go to different communities. We empower the communities. We train coaches in the communities. Whatever profit, everything is in the community spent. We won the National Academy of Medicine Innovative Award. Not Harvard, not the Mayo, the 2 of us. I'm very proud of that for our work in the African American community, which suffers more for us. All communities are our communities that need our help. And we're passionate about it. I know that the word passion and scientists aren't supposed to go, but we are. And we love the translation of real science to real people in a real way without gimmicks. Okay. Those are our 2 books. And this is how you can contact us through these venues.